Question is the motion be agreed to. The honourable member for Nelson in reply.
Thank you, Mr President, and thank you to members for engaging with the motion. I really appreciate the contributions made by members, and some of them thoughtful and quite comprehensive, others more simply stated but also supportive and recognising the core elements of the motions, and I very much appreciate it. As the member for Huon said in her contribution, this is about accountability, and so I'd like to just address, I guess, a couple of things in my summing up here that have come up during contributions. One being, in the first instance, what I believe to be the core of this motion today, which I largely focused on in my contribution for the motion, which is around, this was about the government failing to respect this place and respond appropriately to a motion duly passed here in December last year. This is about accountability and the government's failure to be accountable to this chamber. And quite frankly, Mr President, the leader got up on behalf of the government and spoke about a range of matters, some of which were relevant to the motion last year and some of which weren't. But regardless, certainly the elements that were relevant to the motion passed last year could easily have been put into a short document and tabled in this place by the 2nd of June in accordance with the call in the December motion to provide an update to this place. It didn't say provide an update that Meg Webb will be happy with. It didn't say provide an update
I don't think they can do that.
It didn't even say provide an update that the majority of the chamber would be happy with. It just said provide an update. And quite frankly, if the government, via the leader here today, is able to run through a range of matters, some of which were vaguely relevant, here, now, when dragged kicking and screaming by yet another motion to do so, it could have been done respectfully and in appropriate accordance with the motion from last year. They could have tabled that and gotten on with it. We could all have gotten on with it. We may have wanted to discuss it further via other motions subsequent to it, so be it. There could have been other ways that members here, including me, might have expressed views about the response provided, but it would have been a response. It would have been tabled as per the motion, and it would have been what this chamber should be able to expect from a respectful government of the day to this chamber. Absolutely ridiculous, Mr President. But the leaders then to say at the end of the contribution, the government's contribution, that they'll take note of how this motion goes today and respond to it. Well, why on earth would we believe that to be true? Why on earth would any of us here bringing any motion at any future date, as the member for Pembroke rightly said in his contribution, we all bring motions at times, and if they're supported in this place, all of us, I think, here, or many of us here, would have each other's backs in the fact that a motion passed by this chamber should be at least responded to appropriately and respectfully by the government. Maybe not to the extent that we would all like. We may not have been in agreement with the original motion when it was debated, but once passed, it's actually this chamber's responsibility to hold the government to account to the motion, which is what this motion was about today. So thank you to the members who expressed support of that function of today's motion. What an embarrassment for the government. I'm sorry that the leader had to be embarrassed in that way by the government, because quite frankly what they had her get up and say here could have just been done 2 months ago in accordance with last December's motion. We wouldn't have needed this one. Could have quietly gone away. So that's that part of it, Mr President. The other part, because although I didn't go there in my initial contribution because other members brought up some elements relating to the substance of the original December motion last year, I just wanted to respond to a couple of those. And we know, Mr President, that I could potentially respond to those in some detail, but I will keep it very brief for the purposes of summing up, knowing we have other business today. I absolutely agree with the member for Murchison. It's a complete nonsense that we could not act on this in a leadership fashion as a state, particularly as a state, as a member for Murchison said, that has established its own team under a state banner, essentially, and that we could show leadership and do so on behalf of our community, knowing that actually that would be well supported by this community in Tasmania. It's an excuse and nothing more for the government to say things have to happen at the federal level before they can do anything. That's rubbish. Of course, we are able to take action on matters that do relate to the specific things under the purview of a state government. State-owned venues and arrangements relating to those absolutely fit squarely in that. Yes, there is a national framework that's playing out. Yes, there was legislation that the federal government did finally bring, and I think has actually just been passed through the federal
They've done
Parliament.
a deal on it anyway. Yeah.
Let's be clear, though, the most contentious parts of that legislation that the federal government were bringing and that have recently been negotiated there and passed, by the sound of it, in the federal parliament in negotiation with the federal opposition. The contentious parts of that related to the phased-out banning of online gambling advertising. Those were the bits that became contentious and the inducements associated with that. The actual recommendation from the Murphy report that related to the banning of gambling advertising in stadia and on players' uniforms was uncontentious. That was supported, that is still supported by the federal government. I haven't heard anyone in the federal parliament getting up and speaking against that. That is part of the plan. The recommendation in the Murphy report said the federal government would need to work with state governments and jurisdiction governments in order to, state and territory jurisdiction governments, in order to implement that recommendation, because the federal government could not have done it by themselves, because it sits here at a state level for this state government to be acting in that place. It's absolutely available to this state government to do it. Even if it doesn't want to rush into that, if that's what it feels like, if you're requested to do it in a 12-month period, seems like a fairly reasonable amount of time to give it some thought and begin progress towards it. You could do it in a longer time frame, but you could actually start taking tangible steps now. The fact that the government wasn't able to say, having noted complexities about this in relation to contract sign, in relation to impact on sports clubs, in relation to a whole bunch of other things, having noted that, it didn't describe taking any action in the time that's transpired since December last year. Didn't describe any action it's taken to try to quantify some of those complexities, to try to model out what an impact will be, to gather information about what the scope of this might look like at a state level, even though this is coming down the tunnel, Mr President, because it is part of the Murphy report recommendations that have been accepted by the federal government. It will be progressed in conjunction with the federal government down to the state and territory jurisdictions. So there's plenty of work to be done then to work through the complexities. If the government can describe the complexities, it could actually be taking, even if it's slower than we might like, it could be taking steps towards better understanding, documenting, quantifying, analysing those complexities on its way to arriving at the destination of the required ban. Wasn't able to describe any of that, therefore it's just simply busy work, that they're just talking about things that can assist them to give excuses and delays, assist them in explaining why they're doing absolutely nothing. Oh, it's all too hard. No, it's not. If you want to do it, if you wanted to do it on behalf of Tasmanian families, Tasmanian children who just want to be able to go to a state venue here and watch sport without it inextricably being linked to gambling via advertising there at the venue on players' jerseys when you're trying to watch your local team. Of course it's possible. Of course, if the government wanted to do it, it could and it should. I think the Tasmanian community would have an expectation that this government would do so, and will applaud if and when it finally does, Mr President. It's absolutely unquestionable now. We do not advertise in our stadiums or on players' jerseys and uniforms alcohol products. We don't advertise smoking products. Of course, we got to that point on those products, both legal products, nothing illegal about them. We can all purchase those products legally, but we don't advertise them in any way to do with our sporting codes anymore. We haven't for a long time. This is the same direction we're moving in around gambling. Slowly, far too slowly in my view, Mr President, because of course we all know that gambling is a harmful product. Of course we all know it's designed to be addictive, to entice people into a state of utilising that product to the point of self-destruction. That's what it's designed for. So, of course, it's a public health issue for us to minimise the impact of that in our community. And, of course, that will inevitably arrive us at banning the advertising of that product, certainly in situations where we know vulnerable and particularly young vulnerable people will be exposed to that advertising. There literally should be no one in any leadership position in this state who has any doubt about that inevitability, the path that we're on to get to that destination, Mr. President. The only reason we would have any delay in getting there is to be self-serving to the vested interests in that space and the hold they may have over us in some form. And so, Mr. President, it's a shame to have any government provide excuses that aren't about not being able to get something done. It's about not wanting to get something done, quite frankly. As the member for Murchison quite rightly said, this is a government that makes very questionable claims to supporting evidence-based reforms when it comes to gambling. Wrong, they don't. They turn their back on evidence-based reforms and put forward fake reforms instead. That's absolutely true fact, indisputable. Our Liquor and Gaming Commission says as much. This is a government that still uses absolutely inappropriate terminology when it speaks about this topic, and the government's response here today talked about the fact that the government has a role in promoting responsible gambling. Mr. President, there couldn't be anything that's a worse way to characterise that. There is no such thing as responsible gambling when it's an addictive product. The people who end up with a gambling addiction, who are absolutely victimised by predatory gambling habits through advertising and inducements and the like, are not finding themselves in that absolutely horrific situation because they lack responsibility. Gamble responsibly is an outdated, absolutely incorrect and victim-blaming word usage and language to use. It's the responsible service of gambling that should be the focus of any sort of examination here and promotion. The responsible service of gambling is about how we present it to our communities via advertising, how we present it in terms of where it's available and restrictions we might put on that, and how we put protections and consumer protection in place around it. That's the responsible service of gambling. This government should never speak about responsible gambling, because when it comes to addictive gambling, it's nothing to do with a moral failing of the person who's the victim of that. It's a moral failing of the government who fails to responsibly regulate it and put the right consumer protection. Plenty of evidence-based consumer protection available, Mr. President. This government rejects all of it. So let's just be really clear. A government that was genuine, that really did support evidence-based reforms, will be doing pretty much the opposite of anything this government is doing in the gambling space right now, Mr. President. So anyway, more could be said on that, but as I said, I'll keep it brief for today, and I'll again thank members for engaging with the motion. May I suggest to the government can you pay attention to what happened here today with this motion? Can we not do this again? So if we pass a motion in this place and it does something as moderate and simple as asking for a report back in a 6-month time period on what may be taking place in response to the motion, could you please just provide a report back to this place within 6 months, even if it's a report back that we're not going to like, or that says, guess what, we haven't done much. Even if it's that, that's actually respecting at least that very modest request of a motion passed by this chamber. Can you please pay attention to that and have the respect for us not to have to do this again?
The question is that the motion be agreed to. Those of that opinion say aye. Aye. To the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. Orders of the day.